Hi, I'm Laura,
Hi, I'm Deanne.
Hi, I'm Philippe.
and welcome to our Lymond Book Club, where we are reading Checkmate by Dorothy Dunnett. And today we're going to talk about part 5, chapters 1 through 4. Philippe will lead the discussion, but before we dive in, overall thoughts that you guys want to share.
I think that these 4 chapters work really well as a section together because it's kind of this telescope view of the relationship, where chapter 1 is a complete outsider's view. Chapter 2, we get little glimpses of what's happening at Sevigny. Chapter 3, they're like presented with a problem. And then chapter 4 just breaks it wide open. So it's a really good mini section to have picked to focus on for today.
Yeah, I agree. I was really glad that you included chapter 4, even though we usually only do 3 chapters. I thought this was a really good. I would have been sad if chapter 4 had been part of the next section. I will confess I was very, very, very reluctant to read this section because the last section we read was the only time that I have tried to read Lymond in the midst of other things happening. So I was at my parents' house and I was reading it in the living room and there was like 5 people milling around. And so obviously, as we know from last week, like I totally missed what was going on. And so then in our conversation, it was like the trauma of discovering what had happened. And I was just like so appalled and so like I'm not even sure I expressed myself very well last week because I just couldn't think of what was going on very well. And then I just didn't want to start it because as Laura knows, and maybe I've mentioned before, like stories with the trope of hurt comfort are one of my favorites. So like characters who are like deeply hurt, but then have, a comfort usually from another character given to them in the story. And that's one of my favorite all-time tropes. But I just didn't trust Dunnett to give me any of that. Like I didn't trust these chapters to be comforting to Philippa at all. And so I didn't want to read them. So I literally waited until an hour and a half ago to start reading them. I waited till like the last possible moment. And I was actually really very, very happy about how she tells this story and what's happening with Philippa. And I can talk a little bit more about that later. But I think she does a very good job of talking about the aftermath of this. And yeah. I was very pleased with these chapters.
Did you feel Lymond was appropriately comforting in the...
I mean, yes, I did. I felt like not in the like fanficky way that we often read where it's like makes things better, but in a way that I thought was very realistic and very kind and very like he was clearly focused on her pain and I think they're both faced with this impossible situation and Lymond's in a unique position to know what to do, even as in a situation where there's no good thing to do, like there's nothing that will fix it necessarily, but that he does. So I thought it was really good.
He's there and empathetic and gentle and all those things.
Yeah, exactly.
He knows that just being there without any of the extra is one of the primary things that she sort of needs, is the comfort of having someone around, even if the conversation and the joy and the frivolity that they used to have is missing at the moment.
Yeah, and I think one of the strengths of his approach in this situation is something that we so rarely see, which is not asking for someone to be better. Like he's not telling her like you should smile or think of the good things or this will pass. He's not telling her all those platitudes that people say all the time when we're facing tragedy and pain. And it's so incredibly rare that someone is allowed to grieve and allowed to spend time being sad and like not knowing what to do. And I feel like that was an incredibly healthy response to this. There's some other things that happened later that I was like, what are you doing? but I think overall it was a response to pain that we just rarely see. Like in real life, we rarely see it. And
there's even a point where like the word therapy is used.
Yes.
Obviously they don't have the form of therapy that we have now, but like they're doing their version of it, and if that's what she needs, Okay, should we dive in?
Let's dive in.
So chapter 1 of part 5. Lymond and Philippa have disappeared. What a shock. Sevilla ends up covering for them by pretending that she has no idea what house that Lymond was looking for in the end. And then we find out quickly soon after that Archie has disappeared too. And then Sevilla receives a letter from Nicholas Applegarth, along with a letter for the king. That sort of, it's the first confirmation that they've got that Philippa is indeed safe. They still don't know too much of what's going on. So Richard then talks to Austen Gray, and Austen Gray is such a little twerp, and I want to slap him 6 ways from Sunday. I don't know what I just wrote because my handwriting is terrible, but one of the things that we find out is that Austen Gray is now free because of the terms of the contract. And then he does the stupidest thing ever, and he asks Richard about Marta, which Richard actually does have some knowledge of her, but hasn't really delved into it and figured out what's going on. Richard then pledges to bring Lymond back because the king still wants Lymond's support for the war, even though the royal court is sort of really disillusioned and disappointed in him disappearing. And then we find out that Piero Strozzi has visited Sevigny, and his sort of report on what's happening is that they're both very kind to him, and they're both very sort of the perfect hosts, but he can tell that they're not really speaking to each other or touching each other. So he doesn't quite understand what their relationship is at the moment. And that is chapter 1.
There's this interesting thing where they're not speaking to each other, and I don't know about you guys, but like the first time I read that, I was like, oh, what's wrong with their relationship? But then when you get further into it, it's like they're mainly not speaking to each other because they just get each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like the Piero Strozzi perspective on them not speaking to each other is that they're angry or there's some disconnect or something. And the Adam Blacklock perspective on them not speaking to each other is that there's so much in harmony they don't need to speak. And so I thought that was an interesting just example of how Adam is observant and knows them. And yeah,
I sort of got the same feeling about reading that, even from Piero Strozzi's point of view, before we get Adam's, that it's like that thing that you have if you're hanging out with one of your best friends, or like with your family in a car trip, or like at home. And I can sit for hours in the same room with them and we don't have to say anything. It's like absolute comfort in being in other people's presence without needing to fill the space with something. I mean, there is other stuff going on with them, of course.
Yeah, but no, but like there's a bit later about how like they start talking again, and they talk about like literature and philosophy, but they don't need to talk about like the daily life stuff because they just are on the same wavelength, which is lovely.
And we've sort of seen that before in them. For instance, going back to the chapter where Frances was taking Calais and Philippa was sort of seeing the battle in her mind, there's almost that sort of psychic link between them about how close their minds are together. And I almost got that same sense of what's going on sort of in their daily home life in Sevigny, is that they're that in sync with each other.
I think there's also an element that we see later in chapter 4 or 3, I'm not sure which one, but it's where like there's a progression of Philippa's ability to speak, that it's like she's not able to talk about things and it comes in stages. So like she can talk about like very, very surface things, and then she can talk about things a little bit more in depth and a little bit more, you know, and just as she's sort of, as time passes, she's able to talk about more complex and deep things. And so I think there is an element too of perhaps at the beginning, they just got used to not speaking and sort of living this life together in sync in many ways, you know, silently. And that has continued.
Yeah, this whole like 70 interlude is really fascinating, and I still can't entirely wrap my head around it because there's these parts of it that are so loving and lovely and good, where they're connected with each other finally, and Lymond is finally letting go of a lot and just focusing on Philippa, and she's got him as support, and like there's all these good parts of it, but there's also this like black hole of trauma and like walking on eggshells and discomfort and fear. So it's like they're part way to where they need to be, but then they have this like impossible roadblock of,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, there's a deep undercurrent of grief that tinges everything that's happening.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's sad.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I don't want to I wouldn't say this to Philippa, I guess, since Dee advises against it, but there is this feeling of she is slowly getting better, like the progression of being able to speak. And I think like my personal take on it is if they had just like, it's not like she hit a roadblock where she could never recover.
Right. I
She just
agree.
needs more time.
Yeah. I agree. I think this is a thing where like a year down the road, 2 years down the road, like she would become comfortable touching. She would become comfortable, like something would make her laugh, something would mean like, and it would just be a slow process of just climbing out of the hole, like you said, like the deep abyss of trauma, and just like you slowly climb out of that, and like the sun slowly begins to shine on that darkness, and it's just a process over time, and it never becomes completely better. But yeah, I think if everyone just followed Adam Blacklock's advice, which should just be the rule for the world,
So good. I love it.
leave them alone, and they would have been fine. But yeah,
Agreed. But I think that, you know, I mean, we get it in the last chapter, like she feels guilty, and you know, they should have just given it more time, in my opinion. But
Of course, I love that of all the people's reactions to this, Archie is the one person that's like, they absolutely need me there. I'm leaving. Goodbye.
I know.
He knows immediately, like, I have to go to them.
Yeah,
just goes.
But still gives them their space while he's there. He's sort of like the caretaker of Sevigny for the moment.
Yeah, and he's like playing sports with Lymond and stuff, being his like male companion.
It's really like everyone is just the menagerie to Archie, and he's just the caretaker of all the people, and you know, meets their needs as best he can, and you know, lets them do what they need to do. Like, just like everyone's elephants to Archie. Just, he's just so good.
Replaced one menagerie with another.
Yeah. In a good way.
So I have some notes on chapter 1. I'll just start going through, but please jump in. I think it's really interesting that Sevilla just so blatantly lies about the house.
Yeah, same. And I think it's interesting in a how is this going to come back and bite them sort of way. Like, what does it mean that this is not wide, like this house is not widely known? And but I had a question. Does Danny actually know the address? Because he was charged with keeping Sevilla away from the house.
He was charged with keeping her away from the Arsenal district where the house is.
The neighborhood, but he didn't know the actual house.
Yeah.
At least I don't think he knows the exact address. So
I couldn't remember.
Yeah. Well, and she's also sort of covering for her own self-benefit because she knows that Lymond went there because Leonard Bailey was probably there as well. So she probably assumes that he's taking care of the Leonard Bailey situation. So she's protecting Lymond and herself in that manner.
I think though she knows something bad happened to Philippa in some way. So I think more than anything, she's probably lying to protect Philippa, even though she doesn't know exactly what happened. She knows Philippa was involved in some way that could be perceived as scandalous because she's, escaped the wedding to go there.
Yeah, my take was that because Francis and Philippa disappeared in the dead of night, Sevilla knows that something bad happened, and she's just like, the more we can delay people figuring out what happened, the better.
Yeah, but it's interesting that she lies to Adam and Danny. Like, Adam is certainly an ally of Lymond, but she still lies. And it's like, and she's so good at lying. And it's just this other side of Sevilla. And then, the way that what happened could be perceived, this idea that Philippa had withdrawn all her wealth and sent it ahead of her, which looks like they were planning to run away together. But of course, that's not what happened at all. She was paying off a blackmailer. But I don't know. It's also reminds me of the Untamed in the sense of like, what you do is completely different from how the world perceives you, and people are always putting their judgments from outside and like putting the worst possible interpretation on things.
Yeah. I love this very, very simple sentence of the king was cross, which is just like so ominous. Like, you piss off the king. Like, I read that and I was like, oh no, what's gonna happen?
Well, he's so cross, he makes him a Marshal of France a few weeks
later. So it didn't turn out to be quite as bad, at least so far it hasn't. So who knows?
I mean, we can discuss that when we get there, but is being a Marshal of France really what Francis needs and wants right now?
No. The king wants him.
I mean, and that's the dark side of that kind of honor, is if you reject it, you're rejecting the king and his making, like, and we have this whole bit, which is relevant as well, of the guy who was like a Monsieur D'Angelo, who's like a Protestant guy, and like the king gave him a heads up, gave him a warning about, all you need to do is say no to these questions.
Right.
He didn't do it, and then the king was angry and threw something at him, and like now this guy is screwed. So
Dauphin instead.
Oh God, yeah.
That poor kid is not going to survive much longer.
No wonder he dies 2 years later.
It's also very, like, I feel like ominous in the foreshadowing of what could happen with Lymond. Like, the king is reaching out to you right now, but if you reject it, he's the king and he can kill you.
Yeah, this whole idea that they're gonna live quietly at Sevigny forever is like, I don't think that's gonna happen, because they're just that people just aren't gonna let Lymond be like retire quietly to the country. Like, no matter what country he's in, the leader's gonna want him. So, especially
since they're still in France, like they haven't even left the country where the king rules. So,
I mean, maybe they could go to like Belgium or something. Like, maybe they could go to some country elsewhere and do it, but if they're in Scotland or England or France, it's not going to happen.
Somebody will always want a piece of them, or piece of him, really. So then we have to have
an asset.
I'm sorry?
He's such an asset to whatever country that he owes his allegiance and loyalty to.
Yeah, and then correspondingly a threat, so that his rivals and or potential enemies are trying to take him out when he's just like, I don't even want to deal with you. I'm not doing anything. Yeah. So we have the De Guise making it sound, as horrible as possible, trying to get rid of him as a rival. How dare you make light of the fact that he betrayed the king by running away and all this stupid stuff.
Yeah.
Well, the De Guises are set up quite nicely now that both Lymond and Andelo, whatever his name is, and unfortunately now Piero Strozzi is gone as well. So Charles de Guise is looking, or Francois de Guise, whichever de Guise is the Duke. I can't keep track of their names.
Francois. Charles is the cardinal.
Okay, so Francois is looking really good in the eyes of the king.
Yet a total idiot in this book.
Oh God, the way he bungles.
Oh gosh, like. I mean, we knew he was bad, but wow, that was bad.
Yeah. No, just wait for me. You can take the city now, but wait till I get there.
Yeah.
I'm totally jumping ahead, but.
No, I totally, because I work in corporate America. This is how the world still works, people who make terrible decisions and screw up other people's lives just so they can get the credit for something. Like, this is ubiquitous. Luckily, it's not a battle, and at least in corporate America, nobody's actually going to die, but it's still the same thing where like all these short-sighted decisions, and so that someone can boost their reputation and claim credit.
Yeah, this is actually, I think, such a great example of the political part of this story being written so well, because that whole section was just super engaging because the Duke was being such an idiot, and like you could just see the disaster. Like, it was like waves on a shore. Like, the disaster was just piling up in those paragraphs, and it was really good.
Well, and it leads indirectly to the death of Strozzi, along with the death of a whole bunch of other innocent people.
Right. The disaster. Like, so sad.
I like the ominous, like, she's just kind of giving you at the start of this all these kind of big picture things that then pay off more later, and so you get like the ominous stuff about the king, and you also get that the Countess of Lennox's secretary, Master Elder, has visited the Marquis of Allendale, Austin Gray. That's not going to lead to anything.
No, Elder's still poking around, unfortunately.
Yeah. Just what we need Margaret Lennox allying with Allendale.
I mean, we know she's gonna. I'm actually glad that was in there, because I was like, okay, we needed a little like what's going on with Margaret Lennox bit. So, and then we had that lovely letter from Nicholas. I just love that he ends it. Above all, no one should think it necessary to come to 78. Stay away. Let these people heal.
Of course, that's not going to work. But I like how we get this Nick Applegarth guy just kind of in the background, is like, he's a guy.
He's never really been a character that we focused on. He's just always been there.
He's just the guy at 70, right? He's just like the manager of the estate.
Yeah.
Steward, if you will.
Yeah, like I think we learned about him in Queensway when we first find out about 70, and then he's always just kind of there.
Yeah.
I think he was maybe helping with some of the letters back and forth in the other books as well. But
well, if he's a steward of 70, he would have a lot of power. Like, he would be Francis's voice in everything. So
I always assumed he was part of the sort of correspondence of spies that Francis had while he was in Russia as well.
Yeah, I think it maybe even says that at some point. I can't remember, but yeah, it would make sense. Also, just interesting how like this whole household is maintained, but Lymond very rarely actually goes there. I just can't imagine having that much money that there's just like a household that you can pop into and it's all taken care of.
Well, I'm guessing it's probably an estate too, like with tenants that pay rent and have like small farmers and like that whole thing, and like Applegarth makes it all run, and it's probably like self-sufficient in some ways. But yeah,
Lymond's just the owner.
Yeah, crazy.
Is this a place that you visited on your Dunnett tour of France?
I don't think it's a real. I think there is a real place. There's a real place called 70, but it's not this place.
Okay, so it's not really a real sort of estate.
Yeah, I don't think so. I could be wrong, but I don't think the 70 in the book is the real 70.
There's probably lots of them that you could go visit and like look at examples.
Yeah, and I've always wanted to see the countryside in France. I've only been to Paris.
So beautiful.
But I'm sure it's inspired by like real places. There's the Dunnett Society has these like guidebooks to different places where like if you're a Dunnett fan, it'll recommend things to do. Like there's one for Edinburgh, there's one for Russia now. I don't know if there's one for France. I'll have to look. Yeah, someday though we should do.
There should be a France one.
Sure, there's one for Istanbul.
There must be. I think there is.
Such a huge set piece in 4.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, like I did my own, or we did our own in 2011 or whatever. I went with a bunch of the fans, and it was so good.
So cool. Yeah, let's go Lymond traveling.
The world reopens. So many things we can do.
So I find it interesting on 570 that because Lymond isn't around anymore, the king turns to Richard to sort of fulfill his obligations with the rest of the wedding arrangements.
Yeah, and there's this little bit about Richard returning to the ranks of his fellow commissioners who received him with sympathy, below which lay he could feel the flatness of disappointment.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure the king, the commissioners, everybody's disappointed in Richard. He's not his brother. He's just not quite good enough. Sucks to be
It
Richard.
kind of sucks to be him. Yeah.
I go back and forth with Richard, of course, and I want him to come to the ultimate conclusion that he realizes Lymond's been on his side the whole time. But some of the things he says to Austen Gray in their discussion just really grind my gears.
Yeah. I am not a Richard fan at this moment in time.
Yeah, well, it's also kind of throughout this chapter where Lymond's men know something has happened and are much more sympathetic and wanting to find him to help, whereas Richard is like wanting to find him to
Beat him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Richard, I mean, I think the thing about Richard that drives me crazy, and it's not that he doesn't have reason for doing it, he does, but he seems to 100% of the time, as far as I can tell, make the worst possible assumptions about Lymond's motivations in everything. And it's like, really? Like, your brother's that horrible that he has that, and granted, like, Lymond has pushed him in ways, but it still seems excessive. It seems his judgment of Lymond is excessive.
Except that one moment in Disorderly Nights where he stands up and like, no, we have to stop people now. And actually in Queen's Play, he really comes through for Lymond as well. I think that I think you can explain everything about Richard with he's not the most astute, but he really, really loves his brother and he's really, really hurt. And he's not astute enough to figure out that his brother is hurting him for reasons to help him. And he's like astute enough to know that's a thing his brother does, but he's not astute enough to figure it out consistently. But the only way he could be this angry and this hurt and this like hateful toward Lymond is because he loves him so much, and you know that's why the hurt gets to him. So I sort of I'm annoyed at him, but I also haven't like totally given up on him.
I sort of like, I totally agree with you that that's what's going on. I sort of feel like he needs to grow up. Like, that to me, that is an immature response. Like the assumption that like that anger response towards someone that you love is not an adult thing to do. And so it's like, I mean, adults do it all the time, but it's not a mature response. And so it just makes me I just want to whack him upside the head and be like, grow up and talk to your, like, fix this.
But you know, it's the same thing that's going on with Lymond and Sevilla and his immature reaction.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about this the other day. Like when you go back with your family, you kind of revert to these like teenage and even younger patterns. And like, it's
True.
totally what they're doing. They're reverting to childhood patterns.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of what's going on with Richard is that jealousy. Mom loves him more than me. I'll never be as loved as him. I'll never be as good as him. And then, you know, dad hates him, so I have contempt for him because dad has contempt for him. Like there's all those just things that swirling in your head that get implanted really young, and it's really hard to get past.
That's true.
We've seen Richard come out on the right side of things a couple times throughout the series now. Not currently, unfortunately, but have we ever sort of seen in his point of view him realize that the things Lymond has done to him that are hurtful were for his own good in the end? Like, has he come to that realization at all?
He did realize that in Game of Kings, didn't he? When the whole like trying to get him to go one way and he went the other way, and like he realized it was.
Yeah, and there's the scene in Ring Castle before he punches him where he actually says, I know sometimes I forget exactly, but it's like, I know sometimes you lie to me for my own good. If that's what you're doing, please just tell me what's really going on.
Right.
And Lymond still doesn't tell him.
Right.
Yeah, because then he would do the other thing and it wouldn't be good anymore.
Right.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if we ever really saw that realization from his point of view or not.
It's like he has it, but then he reverts. He wants to believe Lymond is for the good, but then he also, like, Lymond went away for so long and has been so mean to Sevilla that he's like, I think what's happening in Richard's head is like Lymond was somewhat good in Game of Kings and maybe in Disorderly Nights, but then when he went away, he lost it and he just became power hungry and greedy or whatever.
Yeah. Or even just the I know sometimes he lies to me for my own good, but I'm so hurt right now. I can't like this time it has to be real because he's so horrible and he's hurt me so bad, and therefore.
Yeah.
Well, in this moment, he also thinks he's protecting Philippa's honor.
Well, yeah, and just protecting Philippa in general. Like,
Yeah.
and I mean, to be fair, if you're Richard and you've got this traditional point of view and you've got this debauched brother and you've got this lovely, innocent Philippa that you watched grow up, like the fact that they went off together, you would be really worried for Philippa.
I mean, the crazy thing though is like Austen says, like talking about Lymond, he says in this conversation they're having, he can trap a girl like a bird catcher and then desecrate her and the court will only applaud. And I'm like, they are married. Like there is like, he's not desecrating her or turning her into a whore or whatever it is they've said about what Lymond is doing to Philippa. Like they are freaking married. Like it's not what's happening now. Is he going to break her heart? Like I think that's a legitimate fear that Richard has, that she's going to be heartbroken. But I don't think Austen has that fear at all. He's just like, he's like desecrating this innocent woman. And it's like, dude, not your wife, you know?
Yeah, it is very possessive. Like Austen really.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, not your wife. She's Lymond's wife. Like,
yeah, even when Philippa flat out tells Austen, I'm in love with Lymond, I always will be, it's still Lymond's fault. He doesn't place any of the blame on her.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and not that, but she flat out told Austen, I am not going to marry you.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still so possessive and like worried
Yeah.
about her being corrupted or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
just said no. Like when she had said like, I'm going to say yes to your proposal, maybe you have some reasonable investment in this, but like she told you no, so like back off.
Yeah.
And actually in Richard's defense here, he is a bit of a voice of reason, or he says my impulse too is to ride off and whip him in his own house, but they're legally married.
Mm-hmm.
And she loves him, so like even Richard is a voice of reason compared to Austen.
Yeah, which that's saying something. Yeah.
Yeah, and Austen, the hostile man, exhausted with rage and grief and pacing over and over, was something Richard had not expected. Like, this is a pretty intense version of Austen.
Ugh. Yeah. And then Austen totally bringing up that, like, so your father had a bastard kid, a natural daughter. And then it's like, Richard, there's a small silence. It's sort of like, how rude. Like, why would you bring up, like, Austen's just being incredibly rude. And I think Richard, that small silence is Richard just like, this is polite company. We don't talk about that kind of thing. Like, what are you doing, you know?
Well, and I feel like you can just feel Margaret Lennox's tendrils in here through John Elder, who like planted these seeds with Austen.
Right. Yeah.
This is the first time that Richard's even we've seen Richard acknowledge that Marta exists.
Yeah, okay, he seems pretty blasé about it. What do you think he's thinking?
I don't think he thinks there's any truth to the matter at all.
Oh, really? I mean, I think he might, like, she's extremely like, I've been told, yes, that she's extremely like Frances. I've even been told in Lyon he called her his stepsister. More than that, I do not know. There's kind of a part of me that wonders if this is just all wrapped up in his anger about Frances, and he's absolutely not going to spill his guts to Austen. Like, he's like it doesn't matter if he's bothered by this or not. He's not going to let Austen know about it. Like, he is, you know.
I mean, Richard doesn't even really open up about his feelings to his own wife. So why would Austen be the person that...
No, he's not going to be like, let me just pour out my heart about my concerns about this possible woman. No.
I think also like Richard's a pretty simple guy, and like the shortest explanation is often the true one. So it could be like, yeah, Gavin screwed around in France and there's another kid. Like, he's not thinking it reflects on Sevilla. He's not thinking anything about whose parents are who. He's just thinking like, Gavin had a bastard, whatever.
Right. And this is an incredibly common part of their society. Like, James Stewart is the bastard son of the king. You know, I mean, it's like they sort of socialize with kids born on the wrong side of the blanket, if you will, all the time. So yeah, the idea, exactly, like the idea that Gavin would have had like an affair with someone and had a kid would not be weird at all. So, and of course, Richard doesn't have any idea of the whole Francis I nonsense or any of that. So
No, but planting these seeds is a step in the direction of having him find out,
we'll see.
which is what John Elder is trying to do.
What do we know? Like, okay, here's a question. Philippa was able to get the papers from Horrible Man. What do we know that Margaret Lennox / John Elder knows? Like, what do they actually know?
They know that they're, actually, I don't know for sure.
Right? I
They know,
don't know for sure. I can't remember if we actually know what they know.
they know that Horrible Man had some sort of proof, but I don't think they know what the proof is. They know that Marta exists and that she looks so much like Lymond that there's probably something going on there. And I think that's probably the core of what they have to hinge on now, because we know that John Elder wants to set up a meeting with Marta.
Yeah, I mean, I think they know that Lymond, Eloise are not Gavin's children. That Sevilla had that there's something fishy with Sevilla in this house in Paris.
Well, because they offered the £6,000
right
for those papers, but I don't know if they know what the papers say.
Okay. Right. That was my question. Like, they want evidence.
Exactly.
To humiliate Lymond and humiliate Sevilla. But do they know the facts of what they were paying for, or were they waiting to get the papers to have the facts? I'm curious.
I will
Probably
say
more of the latter.
Margaret. Well, I was gonna say Margaret Lennox is ridiculously smart.
Informed.
Yeah. So like maybe she knows, but we don't. I don't think we know what she knows at this point.
Yeah.
If she does know, without the evidence, her claims won't hold up.
Yeah, but even accusations are bad. So even if she just starts letting rumors abound about stuff, it's not good.
Well, while she's in a position of power.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that once the queen dies, that's going to go away. Because I think historically that is mostly what happened.
Oh, queen. Yeah. Right.
That queen.
Queen. I'm like, too many queens. Right.
Queen Mary of England, not Queen Mary of Scots.
Mary of England. Yes. Yeah, you're right. I still don't remember when she dies. Pretty soon.
Probably like before the end of this book, I hope.
I kind of hope so too. I would really love Elizabeth to be on the throne at the end of the book, but it's not really the main part of our story, so who knows?
There is one thing before we move on from the Richard stuff where Richard says about Lymond, he has merely broken, as always, every promise he ever made before man or God.
Yeah.
I find that interesting, again, because this brother relationship is almost like the same brother relationship as in the Untamed. And Lymond did totally break these promises. He was like, I'm never going to live with Philippa as man and wife, and then he breaks it. But there's a really good reason. And it just, I love the parallel because the same thing happens in the Untamed where Wei Wuxian breaks every promise he makes in the entire story, but always for like a good reason.
Yeah. I mean, I think every single time someone promises anything, there should be an unspoken caveat of circumstances remaining the same, blah, 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 blah. It's like, as long as circumstances remain the same, I promise, blah, 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 blah. And as soon as circumstances change and it doesn't work, like, sure, Lymond could have kept his promise. What would the fallout have that been? It would have been horrific. So
I couldn't have imagined what would happen with Philippa to end up in a situation where he would have to stay married to her to protect her,
Yeah, exactly. So once circumstances changed, he couldn't keep his promise and be honorable. So yeah.
So thoughts on the end of this chapter is Strozzi's point of view. Thoughts on this?
I mean, I wish he'd just get to the point and tell everybody what was happening, but he tries to like do his best Francis impersonation and use all this flowery language to tell them, to the point where Sevilla's like, please just let us know what's happening.
And as I've said before, I'm not a big fan of Pierre Strozzi. I think because, as it says before, like, he was a mischievous man and not above malice. That's a strong statement. Like, some of what he is saying in this section is mean. Like, he's being deliberately making it seem bad because he's malicious, and that's dark. So it just, like, I like him. I like his relationship with Lymond. I think they're interesting rivals / companions or whatever. But as a character, I like him. But as a person, I don't like him. I think he likes to have fun at the expense of others. And I think part of that is happening here.
I mean, as far as rivals go, he's a lot better than the DeGees.
True.
I don't think he's actively trying to harm Lymond, but there may be some sort of jealousy and, political positioning going on.
Yeah, I mean, oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was just gonna say, I mean, the narrator tells us he is. So I think that's interesting. But we cannot believe the narrator, but
well, no, I mean, there's a matter of degree. How malicious is malicious? I think he likes Lymond, and he probably wants to help Lymond, and he's friendly with Lymond, and he enjoys Lymond's company. But if it came down to him or Lymond, he would always choose himself. Yeah. That has never happened. It's like a possibility that underlies their relationship because they are rivals, that if they were pitted against each other, Strozzi would turn on him. So they can never totally be like trusting each other, but that never happens. And in the meantime, he's good company and they like each other.
I think he likes Lymond. I don't think he wants to help Lymond. Like, I think he likes him, but I think he finds it more interesting of Lymond's struggles. Like, I think he's entertained by Lymond and he likes him and he thinks he's an interesting guy and he's fun. But I think Strozzi thinks it's more interesting if Lymond has a hard time. Like, that's more entertaining for him. So, yeah, I just don't. Which is understandable, but
I think he just has really different ideas about human nature and what Lymond needs. Like, remember when he's like, "Oh yeah, just sleep with Catherine or whatever."
Right.
Just like on a different wavelength. He's part of this world of men that Lymond pretends to be part of, but just isn't really. He also cracks me up in this when he says, "It is true, of course, when I am there, there is no need for others to converse."
True.
He's just entertaining. It's nice to have someone fun around. Yeah, and then he does reveal at the end that they sleep apart. So he's observant. He's figured out that they're not actually living as a couple. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Final thoughts on chapter 1. All right, Philippe, let's dive into chapter 2.
Chapter 2. So right at the beginning of the chapter, Marta returns to Jarrett, which we can go over a little bit in length. Then there's a bit of political maneuvering and about the war and about the Calvinists. This is where we find out what happens to Monsieur d'Andelot when he makes the mistake and the king tries to throw a ball at him and hits the Dauphin instead. Then John Elder, we see his meeting with Marta, and she's very coy and doesn't give up anything. And then Sevilla sort of convinces Adam to leave and check out Sevigny for himself. When he gets there, we find that Archie is there, and then we see Lymond and Philippa, and there's a sort of sense of tranquil hospitality that is happening. And we get a lot of Adam's thoughts on what is really going on. And we see sort of that at this moment, Lymond and Philippa really want no news of what's going on in the outside world. They're trying to stay very sort of contained with just what's happening at Sevigny. There's no music and no laughter. But we also find out through Philippa that the headaches are gone, Lymond's headaches. Adam sort of gets the sense when he's with them that he's intruding. So he retires to his room and then sort of creeps on them and spends a couple hours on his balcony watching them and sort of sees what's going on in their private moments, which I'm curious as to whether Lymond knew that he was being watched or not. Not, you don't think so at all? It seemed a bit performative at times, but we'll discuss it then. And then he returns to Paris and says the best line in the whole book is like, for God's sakes, leave them alone. That was chapter 2.
I don't think Lymond knows that Adam is watching, but I think there's a bit later where we find out that Lymond stays in that room because he knows anyone could be watching, and so that he's sort of always performing in a sense, like, but I don't think he specifically knows that Adam is watching it.
But I think like the whole like the curtains are open thing is on purpose, and there's like light in the room and the curtains are open so anyone can see into the room clearly. And
I was just trying to figure out in my head the architecture and the geography where Adam could have gone out on his balcony and seen this happening in a room either across the way or like next door. I still don't quite have the architecture.
Several things. So it's the 17th century. The house could be built in an E, like with wing, because we know there's multiple wings. So often there was like an E shape or an H shape to a house, or it could just be an L shape where like he's in one room and he's looking across at the L. But yeah, the house, there's got to be some sort of like wing that's off of the main that's doing that.
Yeah, I was thinking there was like a courtyard in between. And yeah, you could see across the way.
It could even be like a circle with an inner courtyard, and you could just see across. Yeah.
So why does Marta go back to Jarrett?
I don't know, but that whole section was so sad. The bit where I don't know why she's coming back, but she says maybe she wants to try again. I don't know. But he's like, he's saying that he's been faithful to her. And she can ask Danny and Adam. And she says, you don't ask if I have been, like, you don't ask if I can supply a testimonial. And then he did sigh, looking at her from the open dark eyes in which there was much dignity but no guile, alas, to match hers. You know, he said, that with or without a testimonial, you have only to come to be received. And he's just like saying, I don't care what you did. You didn't just like come home.
And he's like trying not to just like hold her and kiss her.
Yeah. And then she's like, even if I make no promises. And he says, I've learned that those two are pointless. And she's like, oh, so sad.
It's like the best description of Jarrett. Much dignity, but no guile.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's enough sort of evidence to see why she's coming back at this moment.
Yeah. Although I do absolutely love her complete lack of any interest in dealing with Elder and how she just slaps him down and puts him in his place.
It's interesting that she comes back after Lymond and Philippa disappear. Like, she could have chosen any moment to sort of try and make a reconciliation, but she waited until they're no longer around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's this bit where we again just have the brewing Catholic and Protestant conflict with this Protestant gathering, which we find out later that some of the Scottish commissioners and Richard went to, which was a bad idea. And then we find out that Lymond had been like keeping him out of trouble, but now that he's not here, they're getting in trouble. Mm-hmm. So just like this foreshadowing of this is going to blow up later.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that the first sentence here is the Cardinal of Lorraine's first peace conference failed, and he returned to Paris, blah, 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 with a quantity of perfumed gloves pressed upon him by the Spanish. And I think it's interesting that the peace talks fail, when for the de Guise brothers, it's war is better. Like, they don't want peace, they want war, because the Duke de Guise can sort of become more prominent and powerful. Like, as long as he wins, he can be, gain more power. So it's like, how much did they try with these peace conferences?
Well, and just this idea that they're poking at this whole Protestant Catholic conflict specifically because they're powerful Catholics, and the more their rivals get involved in Protestantism, the easier it is for them to get rid of those rivals by calling them blasphemers and getting them sent off to blasphemy jail and executed or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, because I don't know what you guys, but like what minimal amount I learned in school about these things was always that it was a religious conflict. But here it's like very clearly a combination of politics and religion, and political people poking the fire, feeding the fire for their political reasons. It's not just a religious thing, which of course is the same.
Most of the time that's the case. Like, the person on the street might be motivated by religious fervor, but the people who are calling the shots are not motivated by religious fervor. It's power.
Well, you even have like Mary being manipulated by her uncles, and like she's 15, she probably really believes that she's doing what's best for the souls of the Scottish by selling them out to France, but like of course de Guise doesn't care about that at all. Okay, so then Marta meets what's his name, Elder. Marta,
not a success.
Marta, faced with a gentle denigration of Lord Coulter for not acknowledging the less fortunate sprigs of his line, merely remarked with boredom that she didn't know there were any such. It was just like, nope, you're not going to get me.
Yeah. And I love her response that she remarked irritably that perhaps then Lord Coulter was the bastard, which, since Lord Coulter had been born fully attested many years before anyone else, and the correct number of months after an equally fully attested wedding, it was clearly prevarication, which for me is like, this is foreshadowing. This is what I think happened. So, but clearly this isn't the case, which I feel like whenever anybody says clearly this isn't the case, it's often the case. So
I also just love her response. Like, she's so quick and witty. I suppose it depends on heredity. What sort of mistakes did your parents make?
Yeah.
Of course, he thought of a very good answer in bed that night as he pulled his cap on, which always happens to me. I always think of the perfect thing to reply to hours later. It's like, damn it.
Yep. Sadly, I am no Marta or Lymond. I am the John Elder who thinks
I am the John Elder as well. I am the John Elder. Yeah. It's like, I'm incredibly witty. Hours too late.
But yeah, we do. I think I don't know where you think it's going. Maybe we'll talk about the end. Like, where is this? Slowly, Richard finding out about Marta. Slowly, the Lennox is poking at Marta. Where's this going?
I mean, we still have the looming questions. We know it's Francis I now, but we still don't know. What's our biggest gripe, Dee? Why did Sevilla end up marrying
Gavin? Right? That's my biggest question. Why did Sevilla marry Gavin? What in the world motivated that? It seems like a ridiculously dumb choice start to finish. So and Marta, I think so much depends on Marta's motivation, which we don't really know. Like, we don't know what's going on in her head. So, like, is protecting Lymond something that would motivate her enough to do some sort of drastic action? Is finding out her own origins, or the origins like of her extended family, like, is that going to motivate her enough to do something drastic? Is Jared, for some reason, like, is perhaps this returning to Jared a sign that maybe he's going to motivate her? Like, we just don't know. We just really don't know what she's thinking. So who knows?
It's a mystery.
I do think she is something is here. I think you're right. Like, I think this is setting up this Elder, Lennox, Marta, like, something is brewing.
Um, so then we have Philippa's 4 boxes being found and taken to, I guess, send back with Bailey's effects. That kind of sucks. I mean, luckily they have lots of money anyway, but
Yeah, I was like, okay, so the 4 boxes clearly containing money the agent applied to took charge of them for his principal. I was a little confused by this because why are they assuming like Bailey did not own this house and he just kind of weaseled his way into staying there by lying to the housekeeper. So he wasn't even renting the house. Like it's not, he just died. According to what anybody knows from the outside, he just died there and was staying there with his stuff. He's got suitcases and stuff and he was staying there and he died there. But why would they assume everything in the house belongs to him, particularly stuff that's locked in the cellar?
well, so it sounds like he manipulated it and he put this agent in charge, who's instructing the servants. And Isabel Rose is not around, as we find out later.
Right.
So it's this, I mean, it's kind of one of these situations where like it's an abandoned house, there's some servants, and there's an agent who acts like he knows what he's doing, so they just do it.
Yeah.
Oh, for some reason, I thought the agent was from. Okay, I don't know why I thought that. For some reason, I thought they were investigating the dead body, and the agent was like a government agent who came in to investigate this dead guy.
I think he was an agent of Bailey because
That makes more sense. Yeah.
You know that Bailey had several sort of
Right.
with him.
Yeah, and he's collecting Bailey's effects for transmission to England.
Yeah.
So actually, even if he was like a government agent, it's still like, well, he's getting Bailey's stuff. But yeah, it's kind of weird they would assume those boxes are Bailey's unless this is Bailey's guy.
It seems weird. But I guess everything, so the chest remained in a bureau, and so it's not actually being sent to England because there's no traffic between England and Paris. So it's just sitting in a bureau. Like the Bureau of Lost Stuff. Like what bureau is it sitting in? I'm assuming they mean like government bureau, not chest of drawers.
Anyway, I'm worried about Philippa's money, even though she probably doesn't care.
Yeah. Got it. But if it goes back to Bailey, here's a question. If they send Philippa's money back to Bailey's house, doesn't that end up going to Richard or Lymond anyway? Because they're related. Like Bailey doesn't have any kids. So all of his effects and his land and everything would go to his nearest relative, which is the Coulters. So,
I don't know.
So roundabout way, it's all going to go back.
And Bailey's, I always thought Bailey was in Scotland when he was back in.
I remember he was in,
No, he's in England.
The manor in England.
Yeah, he's got that house in England.
Oh, I get the borders of England and Scotland confused.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
Of course, maybe he got a will. Maybe he has a will and like willed all his property to random English person.
I mean, it would surprise me if he let his effects be inherited by the Coulters, since he hates them.
That's true. He hates them.
I would surprise
probably has a will.
Or the government would just collect it, right? Is that how things used to work too?
No clue.
There was no will? I don't know.
No clue. Anyway.
So then this is where we have the reveal that Lymond has been watching out for the Scottish commissioners and trying to keep them out of trouble. And so they went to this demonstration because he's not around. And then we have Sevilla being honest for once, her real feelings coming through with Adam. I'm so afraid they don't speak, he said. And then what do you make of their exchange about Adam says Francis has always been his own master, and she says he's not been his own master when he left Russia, when he was brought to France. He's like a river forced into glass and driven from stem to stem of a conjurer's maze without ever reaching the sea.
That's such an evocative line.
I mean, just that he's been forced into decision after decision after decision by other people's actions, and he's never getting to the end result that he wants because he keeps being forced into all these, which the conjurer's maze, I mean, again, that implies somebody's in control of all of this, which brings us back to the Dom.
The Dom and all these prophesizers.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, if his life really has been manipulated by the Dom in all these ways, then like, it's so creepy. Yeah, and it's like the opposite of being free.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say that he wasn't really his own master in Russia either. He was, he was on the whim of crazy Ivan, and to an extent, Guzelle as well.
He didn't even know he was going to Russia. He just like sold himself to her and got in her carriage and was like, "Yeah, I'll go wherever you tell me to."
Yeah.
Also interesting in this bit is just the effectiveness with which Sevilla manipulates Adam. She wants to know what's happening. She wants Adam to go find out. She says this stuff. She threatens to send Richard, and that she gets what she wants. Adam goes.
Right. And I kind of love that Adam, I think this is Adam's perspective when it says it was an empty threat, but the fact she was driven to it was enough. Like, Adam knows she's not going to send Richard, but he's like, well, she must be pretty desperate, so I'll go.
She also knows well enough to know that Adam's the best choice.
Yeah.
Like, she could have sent Danny or Jarrett, but that would have been stupid.
Oh, she knows.
Especially Jarrett.
Also, she knows that Adam's been corresponding with Kate. Like, she knows that Adam is the best choice. Yeah, for sure.
Imagine if she had sent Jarrett, he would have come back and been like, they're fine. It's like nothing's happening.
Or he would have, like, just been a wrecking ball disaster.
He would have come back with Philippa in tow. Like, I found her.
Or he would have just like found something to get like offended and misinterpret and and then he'd get drunk and
he'd get mad about something. And
I could see him showing up at 70 and Lymond being like, they sent you? Go away.
Yeah, actually,
go back to your wife.
Lymond could have manipulated Jarrett and just played him like a harp and sent him back saying everything's fine.
That's true.
Okay, so then we have Adam's visit. The description of Lymond here is very, very interesting. It's at the bottom of 583, top of 584. It was as if all about him had been stripped down and cleansed and reduced without blurring to its true structure, and his eyes, which were smiling, were clear. Like, this is where I find it really interesting that there's all this ominous darkness, but there's also this cleansing, like Lymond letting go of a lot of these unhappy pathways in life that he's pursued that have taken him away from himself. Like, he's more himself here than he's been in a long time. And their relationship is like so good, except for this awful, thing.
The unspoken thing.
I mean, I think there's a clarity in helping someone, like just that strength of purpose, and I think he's often conflicted about what he's doing and why he's doing it. And, the whole like build a new country or, like do whatever, like there's always a conflict. I think even when he has a purpose, it's still a conflicted purpose in many ways. And in this case, there's no conflict in his purpose. Like, he is trying to help Philippa, full stop, no question. He's putting 100% of his emotional and physical like resources towards this one goal. And I think that's like a clarifying, cleansing thing to do. So, and it must in some ways just be a place to, it's not restful in the sense that he's struggling with some things, obviously, but it must also in some ways be kind of restful that he's not there's not a lot of pull in many directions. He's just being pulled in one direction.
He set everything else aside.
Right. Everything else is aside. It's one goal. Yeah.
He doesn't care about the war. He doesn't care about Sevilla in the moment, Well,
and not only is it one goal, but it's a goal that's based entirely on his genuine heart and his genuine love. It's not trying to fit himself into like square peg in a round hole and he doesn't quite belong in. Yeah, exactly. It's a worthy goal. Like, it's an honorable and worthy goal, and one that he cares deeply about. And
and we see that Adam keeps trying to like give him information and draw him back into the world, and he's like, Adam, no.
No, stop.
Let me show you my horses. Let me show you the fruits of our labor here at the farm. It's like, this is what is important. This is what matters right now. I don't need the outside world impinging on me. And it's so nice that they get at least a little bit of time to do this before the king comes calling.
Yeah. And I think the metaphor that Lymond uses of an earthquake is interesting, because like an earthquake happens and the landscape is never the same. Like an earthquake happens and it changes the landscape, but that doesn't mean it can't be good afterwards. You know, like there's this idea that it's a devastating event, but then it heals over time. You know, so that was an interesting metaphor to use.
There's also the really interesting fact that Lyman is now speaking in the we instead of the I.
Mm-hmm.
And Dunnett usually never calls out when she does that. But she's in Adam's point of view here, and Adam notices, so she actually calls it out.
Yeah.
Lyman had said, instead of the familiar imperious I.
Yeah.
Just this idea of like the way that he is conceptualizing himself has changed.
Mm-hmm.
He's part of a we. He's not just the imperious I anymore.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, I think that is also really interesting. And it seemed for a second like Adam was annoyed by it, and then he saw Philippa and Lymond. He's like, oh, that's what's going on. You know, it was. Yeah.
Well, and he sees that they're not talking is out of, not out of like awkwardness, but out of them intuitively knowing the pattern of each other's thoughts and actions.
Mm-hmm.
Communication there was effortless as breathing and achieved in passing with the eyes.
Yeah, the ease of mind they created for one another. And yet there's something so deep and so dangerous that it could barely be felt, that there was no music and there was no laughter. So like that paradox, I think, that you mentioned earlier, of just this wonderful relationship and yet this horrible thing as well.
Yeah. And it's just so interesting because we've spent 6 books now with these characters, and we've never had Lymond have this kind of connection with someone and this like partnership of equals the same way. And of course Philippa hasn't had that either in the same way. So it's like they've achieved something that we've been hoping for them for so long, but it's incomplete, and it's this looming darkness.
I think there's one thing that's super interesting on 587, where Adam and Lymond are talking, and Lymond, or Adam's trying to draw him back with Richards. You know, he's saying like he could be in difficulties, and Lyman's just like, he's of age, like he's an adult, you know, and perhaps, you know, I don't mean this to fall on you, like maybe my mother could be persuaded he could take her back to that. And Adam said, well, she's not going to go while Philippe is here. And so then Lymond replies with, I have told you the only solution. The world has turned. We are 2 families now, 2 trees, 2 separate plantings. Tell them that. And then he quotes Revelation, and he quotes from the end of Revelation. He says, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the old things are gone. And I actually looked up that verse in Revelation because I knew it was part of a big passage. What happens next is a whole description of heaven. And so it's this beautiful description of what heaven is going to be like, and that it's, you know, it's just gorgeous and everything is wonderful and fixed. And I think it's interesting that he's like, we're separate. We're now this separate thing, and we're going to have heaven. And you're just like, oh, maybe not. You know, but I love that he's thinking that way.
Well, and I also think that part is really interesting because Lymond and Philip are having a whole silent conversation where Lymond is basically like, you know, he is of age, like I'm not going to get involved in this, and Philippa is clearly challenging him and saying like, you know, something to the effect that you can't just leave it like that and make this everyone else's problem and not help. And so then that's when he says, I did not mean the onus to fall on your shoulders. Like he's showing this empathy to Adam because Philippa is challenging him like, hey, you're leaving Adam holding the bag here.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then he comes back with like a suggestion, like perhaps my mother could be persuaded to leave and blah, blah.
Yeah. And there was one thing that was after this verse where he says the old things are gone. The very next phrase in that is, behold, I shall make all things new. And I think that's what he's trying to do, but it in some ways doomed to failure, but maybe they can heal over time.
But also I think what's interesting is that that's what Lymond is trying to do. He's saying, I'm leaving everything else behind, Philippa. I'm staying just with you, and we're going to make this heaven here. And she's the one saying,
yeah,
not realistic.
No, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we get it with Gray as well later. Like she's trying to get him to realize that, like, he can engage with the world in some way, or she thinks he has to. I don't know that he actually has to.
Yeah, and it's neat to see this contrast too with the home that he's built with Philippa, with the home that he built with Gazelle, and how the Gazelle home was like, it says it was exquisitely furnished but impersonable. Oh no, the chateau is exquisitely furnished but impersonal. Until now, Lymond had visited it only rarely. But to this home, neither he nor Philippa, it was clear, had brought the detachment of mind which had made of the house in Barovia a casket of brilliant treasures. So it's like they both bring an engagement of mind and not a detachment of mind to this home. I like.
Well, and I think it reminds us also of the way that the relationship with Gazelle was like a business partnership in a way. And there were some feelings, but like it's nothing like the feelings that Lymond and Philippa had for each other.
Yeah. It's a towering, intangible thing that they have together. Yeah. Yeah.
So then this whole sequence where Adam is watching them. Thoughts on, I do like the idea that Adam is not intending to spy, unlike Strozzi, for whom who totally would be spying. Adam just wants some fresh air, but when he opens the window, he realizes he can see them and ends up watching for hours. So we find out later, this is where she's telling Lymond that she's not pregnant. She got her period.
Right.
But yeah, thoughts on all this?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just like he's just comforting her the best way he can, but he can't touch her, which is sad. And that moment after she leaves, when he picks up the handkerchief and then like puts it back down exactly the way it was, it's just, oh. And she smiles at him.
The way she gives him a smile of such sweetness before she goes.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea also, we find out later that he's been staying in the salon in case if she needs him, she can come find him there.
Yeah, just this waiting, like the patient waiting, availability, like he's available, but he's not pushing his presence on her, but he's available. Like that's just huge.
What do you think of Dunnett's writing technique of giving us this whole scene without dialogue and being in the perspective of Adam trying to figure out what's going on and not knowing what they're talking about, but observing like the way they move and interact?
Well, knowing Dunnett's writing, I knew we would know what they were saying later. Like she does this a lot where she gives us a scene. And it was really funny. I was actually thinking about this before we started the video, because I knew like you all the time ask us like, what do you think they said? Or what do you think they said? And it's like, it drives me crazy because I'm like, I don't know what they said, but we're going to find out in a chapter. So I'm not very worried about it. like, so I feel like she does this a lot where she gives us a scene. She sort of sets the emotion of a scene first, and then we find out the details of the scene. So it's like, first we live the emotion of what it is through description. Then we find out the narrative details later. And so yeah, this was just one of those times that I think it's a particularly well done one of those times. But yeah, like we don't know what's happening, but just that she's hurt and she's sad and she comes to him.
You're right, Philippe. I like the way you describe it as like we're in a wide shot and we're getting more and more into a close up of what's happening.
Yeah, it focuses in on chapter 4, but I love that Adam, not knowing what's happening, can still see that there's tenderness and care in this room, and that while it's maybe strange to him that they're not really speaking or touching each other, he can tell that there is great love in the air. So, and that's just, that helps me with my little love affair with Adam Blacklock.
Yeah.
Well, and it's definitely true. Like if Jarrett was the one watching this, he would certainly have some wild misinterpretation and go yell at somebody about nonsense.
He probably would have burst into the room and be like, "What's this all about?
Yeah.
Where's your wine at? My wife is a bitch."
Just Adam, like, just noticing, like, Lymond's physicality, like he lifted it gently with equal care. He lowered his hand and replaced it, and it's so it's like Adam is seeing this calm, gentle, careful way that Lymond is being, and doesn't need the details to know that that's, leave them the hell alone.
All right. Any other thoughts on chapter 2? All right, Philippe, chapter 3.
Chapter 3, the Theonville campaign begins. It's sort of all about the war machine rolling back up. The Duke de Guise sort of ruins their best chance of taking it because they're all ready to do it, and it probably would have fallen rather quickly. But he's like, no, wait till I get there so I can bask in the glory. The original plan was for Theonville to fall in 7 days instead and take 17. And then a royal envoy is sent to Sevigny, where Lymond learns the news of what happened in Theonville, and he is presented with one of the marshal's batons. But since there can only ever be 4, that means that one of the marshals must have died, and it is Piero Strozzi. So he died at the battle, which probably wouldn't have happened if the Duke de Guise just let things happen the way they were going to. Lymond and Philippa go to Onzai, pronouncing that wrong, or some place in France to see Lord Grey. And then Lymond and Lord Grey sort of speak on the nature of war, and he puts forth the idea that the king wants to make him Marshal of France, and then we find out that he's supposed to sort of be an arbitrator and help with the decision between Lymond and Philippa. And then right at the end, Lord Grey is like, "Oh, I've been talking to Austen Grey, and it turns out that your men, Guthrie and Hotham, are alive and they have been returned. Yay!" Which is really nice. And then Lymond sort of doesn't pay attention to another word that Lord Grey is saying.
I super love this whole thing with Lord Grey because we've gone this complete transformation where he was this comedic figure of mockery to he's like a wise source of guidance.
Yeah. And like he freely gives his guidance. He doesn't really hold any enmity towards Lymond.
Right.
Like he's well respected. He was a great sort of rival on the field, and he outwitted him completely. And there's this that he isn't like, you are my mortal enemy, I will not speak to you. I love it.
Yeah, it's like a very professional relationship, like war as a profession, and like sometimes we're enemies and sometimes we're not.
Mhm.
And like they have this great discussion on like the nature of war and what it means to be in charge of men.
Yeah, I want to spend some time on that because I think it's gets at one of the core themes of the books. And also what I really like is the twist that Gray thinks he's arguing Lyman's side, but he's actually arguing Philippa's side.
Mhm.
Okay. So we had talked already about just the hypocrisy of the Deggees and the way that lots of innocent people die so that the Duke Deggees can get credit. It's gross. I guess we don't need to linger on it. Although I did love the line. It was set up to make it very easy for Monsieur Deggees to swallow when everything else had already been chewed for him.
Yeah. I also liked Adam's reply to like, of course you're a good Christian. And Adam's like, isn't everybody on the eve of battle? You know? Yeah.
And then there's also this thing of like, we have to take the town in 7 days because Monsieur Deggees has promised His Majesty so. Which again is just something that happens at work all the time in corporate politics. Is like some high up promise some other high up that this thing is going to happen in an impossible timeline, and everybody else has to struggle and work their asses off to make this like thing that it means is meaningless. It's just some douchebag's reputation on the line.
Well, and isn't there a line earlier about how they actually could have conquered this town in like 3 hours if they'd actually done it at the very beginning?
If they just done it and not waited for Deggees, it would be done and over.
Which I think was Lyman's plan. Like, remember, Lyman spent a lot of time in Theonville trying to set all of this up. So had they gone with what Lymond and I think Piero Strozzi had set up, it would have been over and done with.
Yeah, exactly. It was Lymond, Strozzi, and somebody else like had this whole plan figured out. But Deggees' name wasn't on
Was
it.
it D'Andelot? Was he a part of it?
Yeah.
I don't remember. Maybe.
I don't know. He's like a name that just suddenly popped up. And I was like, I know we've been reading about him, but I have no idea what he's about. So
the whole point is it wasn't Deggees.
Yes.
Then it was Deggees, and it was a disaster, and a whole bunch of people died, including Strozzi.
So I think it's also very, very telling that when Lyman gets this baton of the Marshal of France, he shows no joy, but instead breaks silence curtly. Whose was the baton? So I think what we see in this scene is he's really scared it was Strozzi because Strozzi's his friend, and he's really upset about Strozzi's death, and then Philippa's upset because she can't properly comfort him. But I feel the undercurrent of like Lyman really liked Strozzi, and he's really sad that he died, and like he doesn't idealize him, like I think he knew what their relationship was, but it doesn't mean that he's not mourning this guy.
Yeah. They clearly had fun times.
They had fun times. Yeah, and so then we get like, Lyman had not slept at all that night. So like again, clearly upset. And then there's the description of the two of them. Any wish of hers was his also, effortlessly as two pools of a brook reaching parity. Which is just so not Lyman. He's always been so arrogant and so singular and so alone, and this idea that like now he's just her wishes are his wishes, and it just is. It's like must be actually really healthy for him to just kind of let go of it and like connect with someone else instead of trying to be so alone and separate.
Yeah. And then she finds him waiting as he had done every dawn in those early weeks, restoring to her the gift of his presence.
Yeah. But yeah, then this idea of again that darkness that comes in, that she wants to take his hands and offer him like physical, like speechless comfort is what it's called, but she can't. That sunlit gentle path was set with minds and had at the end of it a cap not contemplate.
Yeah.
And he's seeing that too.
I do think it's interesting that I think this is also a sign of her having healed a little bit though, because it says, but this time, unlike those first cruel mornings, she had had to remind herself not to react naturally by taking his hand. So like at the very beginning, she didn't even, it wasn't even an instinct to touch him. And now she's like having to remind herself, don't touch him because it's going to lead to disaster. Like you can't handle it, so don't touch him. But I think that's a sign of healing, that she's got to the point where.
Yeah.
I wonder if this part happened before or after the little bit we read in the next chapter about her finding him in the stable when he's asleep and she takes his hand and then he wakes up and storms off.
I think this is before that. That's after that. So I think that's like the next stage.
Yeah, because that chapter's sort of written like this is what's been happening this whole time. So I wasn't quite sure the timing of that next chapter.
It would make sense that because she's thinking about a lot of things, that would be a progression after this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's why this whole sequence just frustrates me a bit, because she's clearly getting better and it's clearly not a linear progression. There's ups and downs, right? She sees him naked, she vomits, like, but she's still making progress. But it's like she interprets the fact that it's slow and that there's ups and downs as like it's not going to work, you should leave. And it's like she just like needs more time.
Just needs time.
And I think she feels guilty.
But when you're in the midst of it, I feel like there's a sense of like, I'm never gonna get better and I'm never gonna heal from this, and like this is gonna, like, there's a sense of brokenness and like I'm broken and I can't be fixed, so we better just not try. Like we tried, it didn't work, I'm still broken, save yourself. It's kind of, like there's that kind of feeling. So yeah.
So we get also the progression you mentioned where like she starts finding casual talk possible, she starts being able to have more conversations, talk about more things, and just like bit by bit this healing process. And then her take on the sequences with Strozzi and Adam is really interesting. She thinks of these as a time when the whole patient fabric of reason and recovery had been upheld by Francis alone, with the willpower which had carried them through these 2 months. So even when we were in their points of view, I don't think we saw the extent to which Lymond was like kind of carrying the situation and protecting Philippa.
Yeah.
And then seeing it now through her point of view is like, oh, that's what was going on.
Mm.
I did think so. There's this in this discussion of war that he has with Gray, which I think you're right, that it really gets to the core of a lot of this, especially that Lymond has been sort of a mercenary, abandoned and a sort of courier and a mercenary, or a knight and a mercenary. Like he's had all these roles, but a lot of them have to do with war in various ways. And I think one of the lines I thought was really key is that they describe like mercenaries as the mastiffs employed in boar season, and victory goes to the deepest purse while the people suffer the cost of them. And that's the key. It's like the richest person wins and all the people suffer. And that, yeah.
Well, and we've just seen that with the DeGeese thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Lymond who says that. And then Gray points out that it's the opposite of that kind of motivational speech that Lymond gave to Austin after his first battle.
Mm-hmm.
And Lymond explains it as a temporary palliative.
Mm-hmm.
Like Lymond didn't believe that. He just said it to make Austin feel better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and then what Lymond says next is I think is just like kind of getting at the core of like his choices of his life, because he has always chosen war as his way of making a difference in the world. I'll form a mercenary company so I have an independent power base. I'll go lead the Russian army so that then I'll be in a position to build roads and schools. But then here he says, there are surely other methods of preserving the weak and the good. There are other ways of exercising courage and magnanimity. Um, Fighting preserves a man from wrath and avarice, sloth and gluttony, envy and lechery no more than hunting does. So this, like, he's been choosing to engage in the world through war, and he's finally like, no, that's not the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Gray is so interesting here because earlier, like before Lymond says that bit about the richest person wins and the people suffer, Gray had said, like, the end of successful warfare is victory. The end of victory is the expression of a noble spirit showing itself in pity and munificence. Such is the aim of each of the orders to which you and I belong. So Gray's sort of espousing this like nobility of war argument. And then Lymond comes back with like, no, the rich people die and the people suffer. And then Gray is saying, like Lymond's saying there must be another way, like the whole bit about fighting doesn't work any more than hunting. And then Gray comes in with this like, men are bad and we need to send them to war to control their baser instincts, kind of like he's saying, would you rather men unleash them at home or in the council chamber? It is the argument for waging war as an exercise, although I agree with you, to kill for such reason is wasteful, but greed exists and vanity. How do you propose to control these? With a smile, a prayer, and a treaty? This war was begun by the pontiff. In other words, like, you know, so like we have to send men to war to control their baser instincts, sort of. And so, but Lymond's answer to how do you propose to control these is with time, Lymond said, and teaching and fear of ridicule if need be. What I cannot control is the stupid man launched upon a war which is against his material interests. And I wrote off to the side, idiots who don't get vaccinated.
Me too.
Because I was like, he's just describing the folks who refuse to get vaccinated. So.
Well, and I mean, look at all the stupid like wars we've waged for rich, you know, for oil companies and shit, and
yeah.
young people from poor backgrounds die in them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Like the United States military is most like the foundation, which is the enlisted person, is mostly populated with poor young men who are sold this story of if they join the army, they can go to college and have a decent wage, which is not untrue. Like there are those benefits of going to college, and the army is sometimes a way for young men who don't have a path towards the middle class to reach that, kind of. But it's also a, hey, let's just break your body in service of powerful people who makes you like.
Well, it's like a lottery. A certain amount of you will be destroyed, either dead or too traumatized or disabled, and then a certain amount of you will come out on top and have a successful life as a result.
Right.
And,
and I would argue that first group is larger than the second group. I mean,
what's also so sad is, like, you know, she wrote this in the 60s, and this is set in the 1500s, and it's the same crap still. People don't. But it's like, I mean, this is why I think Lymond is a heroic character, because he's like, he can't change human nature, but like all you can do is in your own time fight the good fight, and in this case maybe don't fight. And he's consistently trying to find a way to make a good impact on the world, and he has been trying to do that through violent means, and it's like he's coming to the realization now that there are other possibilities, which is like, Gray even brings it up, like, you chose to go to Russia, and he's like, well, I wanted to mold the nation. But I think even he's starting to realize, like, this isn't what I want. Like, being a mercenary leader, being a warrior, being a Marshal of France isn't what I want.
Yeah. It's interesting that Gray says, but in Scotland you would have no face that was not a public one. You would be a cock pheasant trapped in a hen coop. and they cannot afford to leave you alone until they conned every quill in your belly. And it, like, yeah, I mean, if he goes back to Scotland,
we're back to that metaphor too of the
I was just
Yeah,
gonna say
yeah.
that. It's like there it is again.
yeah,
well, and this is kind of like, it's like the heart of Lymond's evolution or struggle in this book is like, we start out with the cockfighting and Austen thinking Lymond is the kind of man who would, you know, love this. And then we end up with this realization, like, this isn't the life Lymond wants to be leading or should be leading. And it's actually Austen that weirdly is more that kind of person than Lymond is.
and Gray sees that, which is like you said, like, it's an interesting take on this character, that he's the one who sees this truth about Lymond's growth and sees how terrible this option is. Like, if you go back to Scotland, this is all that you will face. Gray obviously knowing this is not what he wants, you know, and that's
Yeah.
It would be the same thing if he stays in France.
Yeah.
So where do you go
Yeah.
other than Russia?
Not Russia.
I said other than Russia.
Well, but I mean, it's also interesting that, I mean, what Gray ends up saying is, I see I've been brought in to arbitrate. I'm to tell your charming wife that you're right, that no man of honor could take high office in a land whose interests may compete with those of the land of his peoples, blah, blah, blah. You'd be best to remain as you are, a landed gentleman, passing the days hunting with mastiffs. And then he says to Philippa, I can tell you that whatever infatuation you have fallen into, you cannot keep that man at your side. He belongs where he belongs, and he will arrive there no matter how deep you bury him. Best free him at once and save the heartache. And he thinks he's arguing, I guess, Lymond's side, but that's actually what Philippa was wanting.
Right. Yeah. And I love this, that Gray is like, am I a fool? Like, he figures it out immediately. Like, wait a second, this isn't the response I was expecting. Like, am I a fool? You want to separate? And Lymond's like, no, we're staying together. But I'm nonetheless grateful for your tribute. And I love that he says, sometime I should like my brother to talk to you about Scotland. Like, it's so great. Oh, yeah.
I mean, Gray is like, obviously he's limited in many ways. He's not the most wise genius ever, but he has an integrity and a point of view that makes him a valuable resource to talk to, and a particular wisdom in his own way, even though obviously it's a flawed person.
Well, and as an outsider, like, he would have a perspective on Scotland that would be valuable to Richard. Like, even like, I feel like Gray has enough honor. Like, he's an honorable person, and so he's not going to, if Richard comes to him for advice about Scotland, he's not going to lead him astray. Like, even though he is the enemy, in some ways, which is so interesting.
Yeah. And then they talk about Austen.
And everybody just thinks Austen needs to go home.
Yeah, I said, you've been made a fool of. They're happy. Get off home and marry a good wench from Newcastle.
Yeah.
Boy is a bundle of nerves like a kitten. Couldn't stand the sound of cloth tearing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Stuffs himself full of volumes of chivalry, which I think is him, the way of him saying nonsense. Like, he's stuffing himself full of books of nonsense, or out, like, old-fashioned ideas, and then comes home heartbroken because some village lout hasn't read them. So, like, Austen's going around, like, spouting off this stuff to people, and everyone's like,
it reminds me of me when I was like 12 or 13, you know. It's like,
right.
Kid, grow up. Well, and I think Austen is a commentary on chivalry. This idea of, you know, they're very old-fashioned ideas about love, and it's not real relationships. Like, it actually is quite misogynist in this putting a woman on a pedestal, and then, like, she can only be on the pedestal or she can be in the dirt. She can't be an equal and a partner the way that Lymond sees Philippa as an equal and a partner.
Right.
And we see it with Austen, where she's on a pedestal and then she's like a whore, you know?
Yeah. There's no continuum between virgin and whore. It's just like, those are your two options. And
Yeah, you are endeavoring to make of this lady a whore, and it's like, we're married.
Yeah, like, no, it's not actually how it works.
Yeah, and then we have to join her pleasure to his about Fergie and Alec. Demanded a gesture, and here she must abstain while even a dog could share its emotion. And then it's the line, when he turns to look at her, she believed banished the thought and was sitting smiling at him, but she believed, meaning he sees that she's suffering because she can't reach out and touch. And so it's like, there's a thing later where it's like, it must not be uttered because it's going to create this cycle between them where the two of them like just descend into misery. And it's like, she's unhappy and he's noticing she's unhappy. And the cycle is already sort of being foreshadowed here.
Yeah, I do love that it says she knew from others the endless letters he had sent, trying to find Alec and Fergie. And so it's just, you're just like, oh, he was like endless letters. That's a lot of letters.
He does such a good job of pretending not to care about things and people. And it's like, oh, he totally does. We always find out later he totally cares. He's totally trying. So before we move on, there was on 598, there was two things I'd highlighted. One of them was Lymond's like commentary on Strozzi, which is he was also a wit and a scholar. If he'd entered the church instead of trying to right his family's wrongs, he would be alive today. And he might have kept Calais. So I feel like Lymond sees this Strozzi as this person with a lot of potential, that because he got pulled into the family rivalry stuff, he ended up in a less than ideal situation. But I think part of why Lymond is mourning him is that wit and scholar that he connected with on a personal level. And it's it's not like Chancellor, they were never equals the same way, but there was a genuine connection. And then there's the way that Gray asks, he says, oh, I heard there's a marshal's baton begging. Who will receive it? D. Thermes, D. Vielville? And then the narrator just says, a royal courier in Blois would hardly escape notice. So it's like Gray knows that it was offered to Lymond. He just wants to bring up the topic and talk about it. All right. Final thoughts on chapter 3.
I just had a line that doesn't really have to do with anything else that I wanted to point out that I really liked on 593. Danny Hislop, jogging about in his cuirass, collecting gems of impolitic vituperation, was consistently busy and happy. Just made me happy.
I just think we thought he was a villain when he showed up.
It's true.
Well, she made it seem like he was.
I was suspicious of Danny, but
she definitely did that on purpose.
Yeah.
It was Ludo the whole time. But even he wasn't really a villain.
It wasn't so bad.
It was just misguided.
Yeah. Bye.
All right. Chapter 4.
So chapter 4 is the 3 weeks in between the sort of baton is laid at Lymond's door, and at the end he ends up sort of leaving Sevigny to, I'm assuming, either accept or reject the baton. So in this chapter, we sort of see the daily life of Lymond and Philippa and how they're helping each other bear their pain and how they're communicating or not communicating and not touching. And several instances happen which are not great. So for instance, I sort of mentioned earlier, there's one day that Lymond goes out riding and he's like bone tired and he falls asleep in the stable, and Philippa sort of goes to him and takes his hand while he's asleep, and he wakes up and storms off, and he just doesn't feel like, I guess they're ready for that step yet. And we can focus on that. And then another day she goes out towards the river and comes across him happenstance swimming naked in the river, and it causes her to vomit, which is also a situation there. I did not take great notes on this chapter. I apologize. So that all happens. And then at the end of the chapter, there's a violent storm and a lightning bolt strikes the church tower. And I guess the rubble from the tower destroys the Hotel des Spheres
No,
because
it's
there's
like
rubble.
gunpowder.
It's gunpowder.
It strikes gunpowder. There's a huge explosion.
Yeah. And because of the sort of wreckage of the Hotel des Spheres, somebody sort of tries to fix it and discovers a shallow grave where Isabelle Rosé is buried. So she indeed was most likely murdered by the awful man and his cronies.
Bailey.
Which means that people are, I'm not saying his name anymore on purpose, because I'll probably say George Bailey again. But that makes me think that there's going to be more into investigation as to what happened in this house, and secrets are going to be revealed. But that is happening in the future. So let us go back to the beginning of the chapter and discuss. Again, apologies for my bad notes on this chapter. I read it like 10 minutes before we started.
You got it. I don't know if the house was destroyed or if it just like some of the houses nearby were damaged, and as they were looking at the damage, they found the body. But
Yeah.
Either way, like, yeah, they found the body because of it.
Well, it said wreckage, I think, in the exact words. So digging in the wreckage of the Rue de la Saracen. Oh, the street. So not the house. It was the wreckage of the street. So I just read that wrong. Again, I rushed this chapter. Sorry.
No, I mean, so like Philippa vomiting, I think it's very clearly a PTSD flashback. She's having a flashback to Bailey. Like she's she's an innocent young woman. She's not seen naked men before. So this is probably the only times in her life she's ever seen naked men. And she sees Lymond naked and she flashes back to Bailey naked. And of course she throws up. The part where Lymond freaks out when she's holding his hand is an interesting one. What do you think is going on there?
Well, let's go through the chapter, like just in order. I think it's interesting that in the beginning, she says she did not argue with him because the unspoken issues were clear. She'd made her case for her. She'd had her case made for her by Gray of Wilton. It was true that she did not need his care now to live. So she's not going to commit suicide. Like, she can live. That doesn't mean she'll thrive without his care, but she can live. That wit was coming back, if not laughter, that they could without fear separate for some parts of the day and find something of interest before, like self meeting self, they joined company again upon returning.
Well, and what that's in response to is him saying he's made his decision, that he's not going back. And then this is her
right.
argument.
Right. So, but I love that the way that this reveals what had been happening before. So like they could separate without fear. They could without fear separate for some parts of the day, meaning that before this, they could not separate. So they were together, like she needed his presence, implying somewhat his unspeaking presence. Like they didn't talk to each other, but he was just with her for the entire day. And now they could separate a little bit, but then they come back like self meeting self. They join company. So it's like they're the same person. They come together and then, yeah, and talk of whatever they've learned of the day or things like that.
Well, and then we have that progression we were talking about. They rediscovered trivial conversation and then started talking to scholars who came to visit them. They started thinking about doing some translations of some books. Like,
yeah. They're not trying poetry yet. Like poetry's not, they haven't got there.
Or music.
Yeah.
Tries, and it just sat down at the spinet and picked out within earshot a short soulish measure and counterpoint. But since he doesn't come to check it out, she stops.
Which is kind of interesting. Like he doesn't come in, so she stops playing. Yeah. I don't know. So then we get this bit about well, first of all, there's a bit about Archie's silence and how much they're indebted to Archie, which is lovely. But she says their therapy, so they hadn't had any drugs or wine. The therapy had been companionship through all the day and as much of the night as she needed, sitting in the long lit grand salle until at length she could bring herself to go to her chamber. And then that's when we find out that she had been telling him about Leonard Bailey not having her not being pregnant from him. But I love that the therapy had been companionship and just being with her.
It's so unusually healthy of a coping mechanism. It's like when Lymond is taking care of someone else, he's much better than when he's trying to take care of himself.
Right. Well, I mean, in some ways, it's like he's giving her what he needed, but nobody gave to him, and he never asked. He could never ask for it. But
well, who was he going to ask? Turkey?
Yeah, right. Who was he going to ask? Yeah, there's no one. Yeah. And then they talk, and he tells her all about his life, and they get into deep discussions where it was then that she found that he had laid flat himself every defense against her that she could, if she wished, enter and be received within this, the long guarded citadel, to kind of go back to the Reen Castle idea. And so she discovered, fragment by fragment, what he had never told anyone, the inner truth of all those events which strung together made up his unruly life. And then he brings up Sevilla.
Yeah, I think it's back to that Reen Castle idea, but it's also the thing with Marta having an innermost room, and the way that Jarrett thinks she doesn't, but Lymond does, and it's like Philippa now has the key to Lymond's innermost door in a way that Jarrett can't seem to get with Marta. Not that I personally think she must have one, but
yeah,
she has not given anyone that key.
Yeah,
right.
Not letting anyone else in.
I kind of had this, it's like you've said before, Laura, about how if we go back and read the story again, we know that all this inner stuff is happening with Lymond, and so as we read scenes, we can get a different perspective on his inner life. And to me, that's what these conversations with Philippa are, is that he's telling her, in all the scenes of the books that we've read, so everything up to now, he's telling her what he was thinking and what he was feeling in all those scenes that we've read.
Well, yeah, and he told her before, the worst spin on them.
Yeah.
Try to scare her away, and now he's just being honest.
Yeah.
And he actually volunteers thoughts about Sevilla,
Yeah.
Wow, that door is open.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Philippa talks about both of them wanting to hurt him, which is true. Yeah. And I love this line about his love showed itself as the air does, by its infinite space and the life-giving properties of its presence.
But then we get to the core of the problem here. I love you in every way known to man. But in one night she had learned the nature of man's love for woman, and all poetry and all music had been wrenched from her.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think gets to why touching is hard, because he loves her in every way, including the physical, and she can't tolerate that.
There's a little bit of me that this is where I got frustrated with this part of the story, because it feels, at this point in the story, it feels a little contrived, that the problem is contrived, because the implication here is that Lymond is somehow, his love for Philippa is somehow so wrapped up or connected to sex, the physical expression of love is somehow so much a part of it that he can't function as a lover of her without that. And I think that's utterly ridiculous. Like, I think that's buying into that idea that men are somehow controlled by their base desire and that they have to have sex. And if they can't have sex, they can't function, and, you know, or whatever. And I think that's nonsense. Like, go masturbate and come back. Like, it's fine. I mean, not to be too blunt about it, but like, come on. Like, he'll be fine, you know, like, spend a couple years. Like, yes, will it be difficult? Sure. Does he want to hug her and like express his love in that way? Of course he does. But he's also an adult person with an incredible amount of self-control that we have seen evidenced many times. And like, sex is hard for him too. It's not like he doesn't have issues around this. And it just felt to me like the character that we've seen up to now would be super hesitant to have sex, like that. And the physical expression of love is something that he's deeply struggled with, and we've seen him struggle with it. So the idea that he wouldn't also be hesitant and like willing to wait, and like, it just seems out of character for me that somehow this is a huge problem. So I don't know, but
I'm actually glad you're saying that, because I totally feel the same way, and I've really tried to like wrap my head around it in a way to make it make sense to me, because I do love these books.
yeah.
But I think I agree, it's dumb. Just wait a few years, you'll be fine. You're not going to die from not having sex.
Yeah.
I think what's going on is like two things. It's like a 1960s, 70s concept of masculinity as like very tied to like having to have sex. It's like, I love you, therefore I must have sex with you. It's part of the love. And I think it's like this idea that Lymond has never been in love before, and so this is the first time he's feeling it, and it's so all-consuming that he has to express it in every possible way. But yeah, it's bullshit. Like, obviously.
I really do think, and I don't say this very often about Dunnett because I think she's a brilliant writer, but I think she misstepped here. Like, and I think this is a contrived problem for narrative reasons and not an actual character driven problem. And I think she so rarely does that it was a little bit jarring to me that it's like, it just doesn't vibe with what we know of Lymond. So
yeah, it's like she's got to wrap up the book, so she needs this conflict here. But
yeah.
And people argue with me about this, and I've read many arguments. I'll send them to you after we finish the book, because there are people that love this and they find ways to reconcile it where it makes sense. But I've obviously not internalized them because I can't articulate them now. I know I've read good ones that try to make it make sense in a better way. But
I just think this is out of character, and it's not, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's narratively contrived. So it was a little, but that said, overall, I love his response to her trauma and healing here for the most part. I just think this bit is,
well, and I guess to his credit, like he says, like, it's fine, I'll never have, my line will end, that's totally fine.
right.
He never says you have to have sex with me and you won't be able to function otherwise. She interprets it that way. Now, I think it's an accurate interpretation of what the writer put in the book, but to be fair to him, like, he's not saying that, she's thinking that, and she's all wrapped up in her guilt, thinking, you know, I can't be a good partner for him. So you could read it as like, he would be fine, but she feels guilty, and that's why she like pushes him away.
Yeah, that like she has this, like it says, I talk about that my line will cease thing. It's like, and again, his calm acceptance of the situation was not assumed. For him, it was now of no importance, as his place in the world was of no consequence. He was home after a long, harsh buffeting. And that feels like true on a character level, that he has found his home, that his place in the world is not important to him right now. This whole business of like, will his line continue, is of no importance to him right now. Like, he's home. And then it continues and says, and it was she who knew his quality as Gray had done, who had to live with the knowledge that there was no channel by which it could continue, that for the purposes of the present world, that for the purposes of the present world, the flourish so brief was now over with. And like, somehow she's feeling guilty that she's robbed the world of Lymond or something. I don't know. Yeah.
I think that's what's going on, and I think she's wrong. She's being influenced by her guilt, because like he finally has come to this realization that he doesn't have to make this big impact on the world to make a difference, and certainly not through war and being a marshal of France. But she is like, no, but I can't be the reason why he just gives up on everything else and only focuses on me, especially when I can't give him this physical thing that he needs.
Right. And then she says like she'd meant to set him free, but instead bound him in chains. You know, like this choice she made, this act with Leonard Bailey, like she'd meant to set him free, but instead I think I'm reading this as like her perspective, where she says she had cried out to him, my love is as great as yours, now will you believe it? And then remoter still in her consciousness, you do not need to believe it, for look, I have joined you in your gutter. And that because of that, he would never leave her. So she's feeling guilty that because she did this, now he feels like he has to be with her. He's chained to her.
Yeah, I mean, this whole sequence is absolutely Philippa's point of view. This is not the omniscient narrator telling us this is all true. This is
right.
Guild.
Right. Which makes it more realistic that like if she's wrapped up in this, I can't give him this thing that he should like obviously wants or should want, and she's feeling massively guilty about it. That makes sense. But I do think there's an implication that she's reading something real from the character, and I don't think that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
That she's reading something real from Lymond.
Yeah, she's reading. She had guessed the one thing he would not show her, the cost of his abstinence.
Yeah,
she's feeling so guilty because of him paying this cost and trying to hide it from her.
And I just don't see him thinking it's all that much of a cost. I mean, at least not in the short term, meaning a couple of years of a short term. Like, I just don't see him being all that bothered. So, yeah.
There's a line when she touches his hand. He opened his eyes and the trees of the cloud forest toppled around her. Just, it's so sad. It's like you said, there's this heaven, but then there's this like gaping maw where you take the wrong step and it all falls apart.
Yeah.
And then that line, it must not be uttered, or they could not bear the pain, mirrored over and over. Like, that to me is the real issue here, not the like, it's so hard not to have sex with her. It's more just that she's hurt and that hurts him, and then that hurts her, and then it's just like, if they let themselves go there, it's devastating.
Right. And then like this bit where that cloud forest toppled bit, like she felt the laceration of his withdrawing fingers. So like it hurts her physically, like it cuts her that he touched her, and then he leaves abruptly, and she knelt by the chair still holding the warmth of him and cried. And then she went to him and he says, will you forgive me? Him feeling guilty for having touched her here and hurt her. And then she's like, why? For suffering what you have suffered for 3 months. So like she's feeling guilty for that. And you're right. Like it's just going round and round in this pain.
But the fact that he runs away when he finds her touching him is that because he can't bear to touch her without touching her romantically? Like, I think we're supposed to think that.
Yeah, but that doesn't make sense. Yeah, like he's so, yeah.
His passion is uncontrollable.
Yeah, that's nonsense. Yeah, so then we get this, like, I love you so much. All the color there was left his face, but he only said gently, the next time you'll remember.
Right, like don't touch me because it'll
Yeah,
hurt me because if I can't have you
you
like
shouldn't
entirely
touch me. Yeah.
torture.
So she must give him the protection he needed and so manage herself that nothing about her, her hand, her dress, her shoulder should ever approach him in such a manner that one vainly hoped he might be unaware of it. So she's thinking like she's got to keep such tight control of her physical body so that she never like tempts him or touches him in any way.
It's like those dress codes where girls can't wear straps because boys can't be expected to control themselves. It's just
right.
like the dumbest misogyny.
It's just utter nonsense. Like, and like, for how long can one maintain total vigilance? How long can love last in isolation without sinking crushed beneath its own pressure? And like, that is not what they're doing. Like, they're not isolated. They're completely together. They're companions. They've had this therapy and companionship. Like, that's not isolation. And
physical,
but somehow they're not touching. So it's like, it's just ridiculous. So yeah.
This is definitely where Dunnett lost me a bit.
Yeah, this was unbelievable. Like, but like all the stuff leading up to this in this section was really, really good. So.
Yeah. And then we have at the very end, he would enter her mind and would know what had happened. And I actually like that, but I don't like the psychic connection stuff. But that to me is very easy to interpret as they just understand each other really well. They're in each other's presence. They can read each other's gestures and expressions. So I think they have a connection here where they can understand each other without talking. That has nothing to do with psychic connection. It's like, it's not magic. It's just
right. Well, it makes sense. I mean, these men are going to tell Lymond, like, you're going to have a boy. Like, the guys are like, your wife was throwing up. She's clearly pregnant. You're going to have a great kid, and Lymond's obviously going to know she's throwing up because she's like, yeah, I agree. It's not a psychic connection. It's just, he knows what was going on. Because again, he knows.
Right. And he has PTSD too, so he's gonna know exactly what is going
right. On. Which again just goes to the whole, like, the thought that he would be like overcome by physical desire for her just makes no sense, because he knows she's suffering PTSD. Like, that's not sexy. Like, that, nor would it ever be sexy to him. Like that he would have some sort of desire, physical desire for her, while he knows that she's wrapped in this PTSD, which, even though he wouldn't have the name for that, he knows what it is and he knows what she's feeling. So yeah.
And we get really explicitly when he finds her at the Hotel Sphere that he feels no desire whatsoever because of how traumatized she is.
Right.
So now this idea that he does because they're so in love and his love is in every way known to man is, I don't know. I hope people will comment, because I know people love this book and I know people have interpretations of this that aren't offensive, but like,
well, I love this book and I love this character. I just think this is
just weird.
It's just an aberration.
Give us better interpretations, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess moving on a bit, on 610, there's a part where she sees him where his eyes are closed in a chair, and she knows he's not sleeping, even if she hadn't seen his hands on the arms of the chair. And just this idea that, like, we talked about this from the beginning, you can see what's going on with Lymond by looking at his hands, and she just like knows instinctively to do that and can figure him out based on it.
Yeah. And then this whole, like, the fault was mine that I had to swim, that I had to force you to treat me like a leper, that I couldn't in the end give you the spirit without the clay. I think that's Dunnett having Lymond tell us that he can't deny his physical need for her or whatever. And I'm just like, that makes no sense.
And then she says, it's not you who must change, meaning like she needs to get over it and she knows it. And it's like, okay, like she does need to heal, right? And she never will all the way.
Eventually.
But like, from what we've seen, she probably will. It's just going to take more time. They haven't been there that long. Just give it time and like chill. That's why like you're right, it's just a constructed problem. It's a fake problem. If they just waited it out, they'd be fine.
Right, because they're weeks into this, not even months into it, like weeks into it. And like sexual trauma takes years to heal. And it even takes years to acknowledge you have a problem. Like the fact that Philippa is actually like that they're actually both acknowledging that this happened, even if they're not talking about it, they do acknowledge that it happened. And there's an awareness that it happened. The fact that that's even in her consciousness at all is huge and a part of healing, and for many people not something that happens for years and years. So yeah.
So this bit I did not understand the first time I read it, but I think I know what's going on now. Where she says, "Oh my dear, why will you not weep? Or am I not who I am?" I think meaning she sees that he's holding back from, like, he needs a good cry. Mm-hmm. And am I not who I am is like, am I not the person you love most, and therefore shouldn't you accept the devastation that you feel that we can't have a successful relationship? And that's like her giving him permission to
cry,
just break down and cry.
Right, which he does.
Yeah, and then she leaves him there crying because she can't comfort him.
Right. Yeah. But she doesn't, she doesn't leave immediately though. Like she's there for a while. Yeah, she closes the curtains and
so nobody can look in.
Yeah. But she can't comfort or ease except by the act of releasing. And again, that's like the fact that she would think that is a little weird, because she's been comforted and eased by his presence this entire time. The fact that he stayed by her and hasn't required anything of her or touched her, but just been present. And that's been comforting to her. And so the fact that she thinks she can't comfort him, like just staying in the room would have been comforting. Like she doesn't have to touch him. And
I think the idea here, which I also don't like, is he's been comforting her, but he hasn't allowed himself.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
And that he can't get it without physical touch.
Yeah. I mean, I think he hasn't allowed himself to grieve. Like that part of it is like, because this was a loss for him too. Like the fact that she was traumatized in this way is also something that he needs to grieve. And he hasn't allowed himself to do that at all because he's been so focused on her, on helping her. And so he needs to break down and cry. And she knows that. But it's like the things that were helpful for her, she doesn't, I don't, it's hard for me to believe that Philippa wouldn't realize that her presence would be comforting.
Well, I get that the whole guilt trauma thing, she thinks she's tormenting him because
yeah.
So maybe like, she's wrong.
Yeah. And like we've seen, like for this, the whole series, like she's been so practical and so perceptive once she grows up a little bit. Like as a kid, she's not perhaps. But like once like we see her be so perceptive about him, and although she does miss things sometimes, she isn't always.
Well, but the fact that he says it's my fault that I couldn't give you the spirit without the clay is like he's acknowledging that she's right to have this guilt thing. And like I totally get the guilt thing. She and guilty. But the fact that he says she's right is like
so weird. Yeah. That's true. And then she's like, oh well, I guess I can't touch you, so I have to leave.
Yeah.
Weird. Yeah. And then they discover the grave of the lady.
Yes.
Which is not a surprise, unfortunately.
I feel so bad for her, and it certainly just hammers home how gross he who must not be named is.
Oh yeah, he's terrible.
He's so much worse than Gabriel to me. He's the worst person in all of these books by far.
Same.
Like, Gabriel was actually enjoyable to read about, even though I hated him too. But
Gabriel was at
least dynamic in some ways. Like
Gabriel's funny. He's always, calling Lymond hilarious, like pet names, and he's just like
My
entertaining.
sweet thing.
Oh gosh, yeah. There's a great list of them on Tumblr that is hilarious.
Oh my God.
But yeah, this guy is just gross in every way. Not a fun villain, just a like let's not think about him villain.
Yeah. Boy. And I'm so curious how this is all going to play out. I mean, we've got the house, we've got Philippa's money, which I'm, wondering if it's got some sort of like identifying something connected to her in the basement of this house. There's this dead woman who's been discovered, I'm guessing like buried in the backyard. Like what's gonna, Bailey was dead in the house, so there's all of that together, how that's gonna come back.
Lymond and Philippa are going to get blamed.
Yeah.
That's gonna open fresh wounds for Philippa because she tried so hard to get Isabel out of that house and then ended up leaving, figuring, well, she should be safe for now.
Yeah. Ugh.
Mhm.
And so do you think Lymond is Lymond has left 70 now. What's he gonna go do?
He's writing back. I think, is he writing to the king to like say yes or no to this
I think that's
France thing?
what I inferred.
Yeah.
He's got the baton and he's either going to say yes or no. And I have a feeling he's going to say yes.
Maybe. I don't know. I think it all depends on what he thinks is best for Philippa. And I'm not sure what he thinks. Like, what sacrificial act on his part would be,
I think at the moment he thinks that what's best is for Philippa is if he's gone for a while.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, like, is he going to try and have her go back to Kate? Is he going to try and have her stay in Sevilla? Is it best for her if he's in Scotland? Is it best for her if he's in France? I don't know.
Where do you think in our final chapters the resolution is going to come in this relationship?
Right at the end.
I really hope it's not right at the end. Can we have a little bit after the rest? I would just like a little bit of, and here's what happened later. Just a little bit of like, this is what life was like. I always hate it when it's like conflict, and then last page, everything's okay. I'd like a denouement that's at least a chapter or two. But
any final thoughts on these chapters or guesses, hopes, and dreams for the rest?
We need to have a showdown with Richard. We need to have a showdown with Sevilla. We need to have Marta and Jarrett get resolved in some way.
We need all the answers about
what hell happened with the Gavin marriage.
Little we don't know about Sibylla's past.
Yeah. Somehow the stuff with the king has got to get resolved. Like, so this government, even though I don't really care, like, we do have to have some sort of resolution to the whole government. Queen Mary's note about, or like thing about the giving Scotland to France, and like, is that going to get circumvented in some way? Like, what's going to happen there? The Protestant Catholic thing, although that's not going to get resolved for several hundred years, so who knows?
And then John Elder picking his little spindly fingers through everything for Margaret Lennox.
Yeah, what's going to happen there? I'm having less hope that Margaret Lennox is going to show up, but I still hope she does. Like, I would really like there to be some sort of final showdown. It'd be fun though, is if it was like a final showdown between like Philippa and Margaret Lennox, and like Philippa just like tells her off. That would be kind of cool. But,
it would. Please write that fanfic.
I'm actually very curious, once we're done with all this, about reading about the real life Margaret Lennox and seeing if she's as awful as Dunnett made her out to be.
Yeah.
There's like a pretty recent biography of her.
Hmm.
I'm meaning to read it. I haven't read it yet.
That would be cool.
All right. Anything final? All right. Well,
Nope.
thank you everyone for watching and commenting, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.